Thanks for stopping in. My name's Thomas, and this is Zarbo Audio Projects, the channel dedicated to DIY audio. Today we're going to look at this small amplifier board, and we're going to talk about why I think it's sort of a hidden gem that deserves consideration for your next small audio project. Now, we're going to talk about it next. Well, I don't know why YouTube brought you to me today, but I'm glad you're here. You probably, like me, have somewhat of an interest in small audio amplifier projects. I have a few examples here of some different things that I've made over the past couple years that involve small electronics, small amplifiers, rather small speakers. They're not meant to replace your home stereo, but they are meant to give you some decent sounding music where you want it, when you want it, and maybe not so much for this one, but for these two, portability was one of the things that I factored into the design. Well, there are a lot of kits and do-it-yourself type assemblages of components that you can buy to make your own do-it-yourself Bluetooth speaker. If you look at Parts Express, for example, and there are probably 5, 6, 7, 8 at least different setups that you can purchase and build for your very own do-it-yourself audio project, and that's great. One of the amplifiers that I never see anybody use is this one. For the life of me, I can't figure out why more people aren't using this. It doesn't look like much. It's only about 2 inches wide, maybe a little under 1.25 inches in width, and roughly 1/2 inch tall, not including the potentiometer shaft. But this little thing can really do a lot. This amplifier is really good. I like it a lot. And when I say it's good, I mean it's really good. Not. Hey, sweetheart, do you have any more of that bird's nest pine cone tree bark bread that you like so much? I want to make a sandwich and it looks like we're out.
Yeah, sure. We got some downstairs in the freezer. Want me to get you one?
No, that's okay. I'm good.
Are you sure?
No. Yeah, you know what I mean. Some things that are good aren't really all that good. But this really is good. Let's talk about some of the features it has. Well, first of all, as I already said, it's pretty small. But with most amplifiers, really the biggest question is, how does it sound? This actually does sound pretty good. 30 watts per channel isn't an awful lot of power, no. But it's more than enough to power something like this, or something like this. Some small Bluetooth radio that you're going to have in your room or in close proximity. 30 watts is plenty. And even though you're not going to get 30 watts out of this, really, you can get a good 8, 9, 10 watts per channel into a 4-ohm load speaker with 12 volts, or pretty close to that. At least enough to make a little project like this or like this get plenty loud enough for portable use, say if you're outside on your deck or in your room reading or something like that, which is typically how I use these. So let's talk about some of the pros and the cons of this particular amplifier. Probably the most important factor in choosing an amplifier is, well, how does it sound? This actually does sound pretty good. It's not meant to replace your main home stereo. It's not that good, but it's fine. It doesn't sound bad. This is a Class D amplifier, and that means that it's very efficient, but it also means that a lot of Class D amplifiers can tend to be a little harsh in the mid-range, and also can tend to reduce your bass output. I don't notice this doing that, and this doesn't sound harsh. So without getting too technical and fancy schmancy, the answer to how does it sound is basically fine. It sounds fine. For something this small and this inexpensive, it sounds good. I don't have any issues with it. The other thing I like about this is it has a very wide range of input voltages, which makes it very flexible. It will take anywhere from 7.5 volts up to 24 volts. So that means if you have an old piece of electronic equipment at your house that you tossed and saved the power supply to, there's a pretty good chance you'll be able to run this off of that. I've run a number of projects off of old 12 volt 1 or 2 amp wall wart or power brick supplies, and it's given me plenty of output. You can go down as low as 7.5 or 8 volts and as high as 24 volts. So you can get close to maybe 22, 23 watts of clean power into a 4-ohm load with this if you go up to the, say, 16, 17, 18 volt range. And 16, 17 volts, somewhere around there, is a pretty common power supply for old laptops and even current ones. So if you had one of those that you saved when you tossed your old laptop, and who hasn't, then that would make a perfect choice to power this. It does have Phoenix type connectors to hook up. There's positive and negative for the DC input, and then left and right, positive and negative for the left, positive and negative for the right. So hookup's a breeze. The other thing I like about it is this right here, the USB input. Now, I'm alone in this. Nobody else in the world seems to use these types of things the way that I do. I'm just not a Bluetooth kind of guy. What I really like to do is take a small USB drive, flash drive, put, I don't know, 3 or 4 CDs worth of jazz songs on it, and plug that in here and play it off of that. It always sounds clean. I don't have to worry about draining my phone's battery. I have an old phone. It's not that great. And that's the way I do it. I'll have another one with, say, classical music on it, maybe another with 80s music, because I'm a child of the 80s. But it's really easy just to pop out a USB plug and put another one in to change your little playlist. And it plays those fine, and it plays them nice and loud. It does work fine with Bluetooth, but Bluetooth is not quite as loud as the other means of input. So, but me, I just like the USB input, and I just put my songs on the drive and go. Also, this USB plug will charge your phone. It has enough power to charge your cell phone or your tablet or whatever. So that's a nice little addition too. Right here we have a 3.5 millimeter input. So if you wanted to make a really small amplifier, say, to put next to your computer, you could do that with this. This 3.5 millimeter input plug, just plug that into your computer and away you go. Also, this has, it's bent over, but it has this little doohickey here, which is a infrared receiver for the included remote control. Something this small, it doesn't usually have remote control, but this does. It works. I usually don't like these kind of remote controls, but I do like this kind of remote for this, because this is going to be a type of device that you're going to put into something very small, something like this. You don't necessarily want a great big clunky remote control with something like this. A small remote control like this that you can put in your pocket, say when you're outside on the deck or something, this kind of makes a little more sense with something this small. Yeah, with things that are bigger, like maybe with this, I'd like something a little bit bigger. But for some small things like this, this remote works just fine. While I'm talking about the remote, there's an on-off button, there's the mode button, mute button, you can turn the volume up and down, you can forward and backwards with the track. There's also an EQ button. Let me tell you, I hate EQ buttons. EQ buttons, all they do usually is make your music sound worse and worse and worse and worse. Especially with this one, with no readout on here, you don't even know where you're at. But this EQ button I actually like. Now, all of the settings on there are pretty much garbage, like usual, except for one. I think it's the last or second to the last one, which is essentially a bass boost. I don't know if you remember the old components that you might used to have had back in the 70s and 80s that had that little loudness button. You press that loudness button, and what it did is it raised the volume, the level of the lower frequencies just a little bit to give you a little extra bottom end, a little extra kick. It would tend to overcome the ambient room noise and give you a little bit more of a presence in the low end. It made it sound nice at lower volumes. Well, one of these EQ buttons, like I said, it's the second to the last one or the last one. It's sort of like a bass boost. I don't notice it changing anything else. It just lifts the bass a little bit. And that actually sounds really good with something small like this or like this. Real small speakers, even if they're designed to be flat down to 70 hertz, 60 hertz, or probably 90 hertz, with like these, that little bass boost actually does give that bottom end just enough of a boost to make it sound a little more satisfying. So in this case, the EQ, it's not a con, it's more of a pro. Also, this amplifier does have Bluetooth 4.2, which according to the specs is good for 30 meters or so. I might be off, but pretty much you can be a couple of rooms away and it usually will still work. Another thing that I like about this board is the announcements. If you played with any of these small Bluetooth boards before with different input options, you've probably heard a really loud bing, bong, beep when you change modes, or possibly a very loud and very angry sounding person screaming at you that you've entered Bluetooth mode. I don't know why they're so angry when they tell you that, but usually they're very loud and they don't sound pleasant. It sounds like they got paid less than minimum wage. But this one, when you change modes, it's very quiet. And I really appreciate that, because a lot of times you're going to use this in a situation where you just want a little music, you don't want it too loud. And if you change modes and have somebody screaming at you all of a sudden, well, if you're trying to get relaxed before you get to bed and read a book, and you don't want somebody screaming at you, it's going to wake you up. So this, they did right. You can tell they put some thought into that, and I really do appreciate that. Another one of the things that I do like about this is that it's all in one. I mean, it seems obvious, but a lot of times with small Bluetooth audio projects, or even just small audio projects in general, you're going to need different boards. You're going to have an amplifier board, then you're going to have a Bluetooth or MP3 player board. And with this, it saves you time, saves you money, and what it really does is saves you the hassle of tracking down noise issues. I've made maybe half a dozen, maybe 12, 13 different small size radios, like this one for example. This one came out really nice. I like it. It's called the Bantam Table Radio. It uses this faceplate and a separate 50 watt per channel amplifier inside. But I had noise issues. It took me a while to troubleshoot and figure out how I could eliminate the noise issues coming from this head unit to the amplifier. And actually had to purchase another component called a DC to DC isolation transformer, which added, I think, $7, $8, $9 to the cost of this, and a lot of hassle trying to figure out how to troubleshoot it. With this, you don't have that problem. Everything's in one. It's a very small, compact circuit board. You're not going to have the issues with noise. Feed it your voltage, 2 speaker outputs, that's it. The only possible issue I could think of would be the 3.5 millimeter plug, depending on what you have it plugged into. But I've used it a few times, have not had an issue. So I think this is pretty good and pretty clean sound in that regard. Another thing that's good about this, it's pretty efficient. This here, for example, this is called the Mind 65 radio. This uses a pair of Dayton Audio ND65 drivers for the front and a pair of ND65 passive radios for the back. And it's got these lights here that show you the state of the battery. Now this uses a 3 times 18650 lithium-ion battery set that I purchased from Parts Express. But it's this amplifier which is the guts of it. And I've used this, it's got to be over 25 hours. And I'm still on 2 lights out of the 4 lights. And some of the times I've been in the shower in the other room and I played it pretty loud. So this really is quite an efficient amplifier. Class D usually is, but this one is especially efficient. So those are some of the things that I really do like about this. Of course, there's a few things that I don't like so much. Maybe I would change, or maybe I don't understand why they're there. So let's talk about those. The USB input, it plays MP3s and WMAs if I'm not mistaken. Other MP3 type players play a large variety of files, but that's not a problem. You can download free rip and take your CDs to 128K MP3 files, and that's probably more than enough for these little things. That's enough for me. I'm the audiophile, I guess, but that's crisp and clear enough for something of this size. One thing I don't like about this, and this is where all of these little players fall down, is when you go to search for songs, you can go to the previous song to the next song, but there's no way to manage files. So if you do what I do, if you take a USB flash drive and you burn, say, 4 or 5 CDs on it, it makes 4 or 5 files with the 10 or 12 CD songs in each file. Well, this treats them all as one big file, and there's no way to move from file to get to a specific CD with their specific songs on it. So you're there left clicking forward, until you get to the song you want, or until you get past the couple songs that you don't want. I wish that this had an extra button on it for file up and down in addition to song up and down, but none of these have it, so that's kind of a moot point to complain about that, but I still wish it was there. The other thing that you might consider a con would be this, and I'm glad it's there, I'm glad they have it. It's a potentiometer. This is the volume control. It doesn't turn it on and off, and this is how you adjust the master volume. The remote also has volume up and down. So if you turn the remote volume all the way up, and you turn this volume all the way up, then you're going to get your maximum volume. But you can turn this down, say to halfway. That way, no matter which source you switch to, it's only going to get so loud, which I guess that's a good thing. But actually I wish this were a rotary encoder. I know that's a little more complicated, but a rotary encoder I think would be a little more useful, because then I could desolder this and I could put this rotary encoder someplace else. I've taken one of these boards and desoldered this potentiometer before, and I ruined one board, but another board I did successfully remove the potentiometer and extend the cables. I only extended it about 8 or 9 inches, and I braided them to eliminate noise, but I still got a hum, I still got noise. So I don't think it's a good idea to remotely mount this. In fact, if you look at this little device here, this radio, this hole here was supposed to be where the potentiometer went, because I was going to remote mount one of these in here. It didn't work, so I probably am going to have to move that switch up here and put a light down there to fix my boo-boo. I should have tested that out before I got that far. But if this were a rotary encoder as opposed to a potentiometer, then I think you'd probably have better luck remote mounting it and not having interference. I forgot to mention, but one of the things that I do like about this too is this infrared receiver can be clipped, leads soldered to it, and remote mounted. And that's what I did to this one. This radio here, you can see the knob and the 3.5 millimeter and the USB plug, but there's no opening for the infrared receiver. That's because I remote mounted it on the front right here. I extended the leads 6-7 inches and actually put a removable 3-pin connector so that I could get the thing in and out when I went to put it together, and it worked fine. So this can be remote extended with no issues. This, the potentiometer, I would say probably not. Well, I mentioned that I thought this was a really underutilized board and I couldn't understand why people didn't use it more. Well, the next thing that I don't like about this so much is the layout. If you look at this, in a very small space you have to drill a hole for the potentiometer, you have to drill another hole for the 3.5 millimeter plug, you have to make a rectangle here for the USB port, and if you're going to use this infrared receiver in the same neighborhood, then you're going to have to drill a hole there too. This is actually really hard to line up. Let me show you what I did here on this one. I'll hold it up for you, but I'll see if I can get you a close-up. But it took me quite a while to trial and error this thing and grind away with a little Dremel tool to get the openings just right. And you have to make this wood in the back of this thing. I had to make it very thin so that everything would mount up correctly, because there's not a lot of room. That's a little tricky. Well, I might have something that can help you if you do plan to use this board. What I've created is a layout of this in picture form. And what you can do is you can open this up on your device, either your tablet or your phone, possibly even your computer screen if you can shrink it down that much. And what you can do is you can shrink it down to the size that matches 1 inch on your ruler, so that it would match this picture layout 1 inch on the ruler. And then that would mean that this size would be the same as the layout on the screen. Then what you do is gently put a piece of paper on top of the screen, trace it out with a pencil, or probably a pencil, maybe a pen, very gently. Then you can have your own layout. Now I bought this from Parts Express, and I really wish they would include a little printout, like maybe a quarter sheet of paper or something, with the exact layout on it, like as a schematic layout diagram that you could tape on your project and then just maybe cut out with an X-Acto knife, or put a pinprick in the center there where the round openings are. As of yet, they hadn't done that, but I hope they will. And like I said, what I printed out for you, maybe that'll help you. Just be careful. Don't ruin your screen or crack your screen, okay? So as you can see, I've made several different radios with this. I've made this light-colored small radio here. I didn't really name that. This one here, I called the Mind 65. It stands for Mini ND65. These speakers are ND65s. I'm not good at naming stuff. I've also used this, because it's small enough, in a few other different sort of unique projects. For one, I used this to create a rodent displacement system. And so what I did was I added this amplifier to an old bandpass subwoofer that I had in one of my cars. And I used this to evict a rodent, a groundhog, that had decided to live underneath my shed. He'd been there for a couple of days and I didn't know how to get him out. I put out this nasty smelling stuff. He didn't want to leave. Apparently he liked it there. So I said, let me try to annoy him. So what I did was I created a file of short sine sweeps that sound like this, whoop, 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 and pink noise, which basically sounds like a radio station tuned into static. I combined those into one file and I put it on a USB on sort of endless loop, or at least like an hour-long file that would just repeat over and over again. I turned it up to a pretty loud level. And believe it or not, within a couple minutes, that groundhog was poking his head out trying to get out of there. He didn't like the sound. This was able to create enough volume, and that was with a 12-volt 1-amp power supply through like 5 extension cords all the way out to my shed. This was able to create enough volume where I could hear it from inside the house. So you can get unique with this because it's so small. Another thing I made that I kind of really like was a fireplace snap, crackle, and pop device. So this is my fireplace, and we had it converted from propane to natural gas a little while ago, and when we did that, we also remodeled some things. So we got it looking pretty spiffy. But, you know, I come from a wood-burning background, and I missed that sound, that snap and crackle and pop that the fireplace makes. Gas fireplaces don't do anything but hiss a little bit. Sounds like an angry snake in there all the time. So what I did was I created a file of some wood burning. I put that on an endless loop. I tweaked the audio in it a little bit with Audacity. And then I plugged one of these in and created a couple of cheap speakers out of some old drivers that I had. Placed that underneath of the hearth. And so now every time I turn the fireplace on, I can also turn my little fireplace, faux fireplace snap, pop, and crackle device and have a really nice sounding fire that sounds actually really lifelike. So as I've explained in this video, I think this is a really good amplifier. It has a lot of features. You get a lot for your money. It's about $18 roughly. And I think the amount of things that you can build with this really give it some flexibility so that you could use this for almost any small project. So here's the board. I'm going to turn it on. I've got it plugged into a 13.8 volt power supply here. Turn up the volume. I have one song on the USB flash drive. It's playing on my monitor speakers here at the workbench. Sounds very nice. Turn the volume up some. I just have one channel hooked up. I will go from the speaker now to the subwoofer, which I can do just by disconnecting that and plugging in the subwoofer. That's down there. It's just a box, I know, but that's just to show you that there is actually a decent amount of bass going on there. Well, let me put that back up to the speaker. Turn it down a bit. So what it does is, when you turn it on, if there's a USB flash drive in there with music on it, it automatically starts playing that. If that's not in there, it'll go to Bluetooth. And then when you plug this in, which is going to be hard to do holding it, but when you plug that in, it automatically switches to that. I don't know if you heard that. She said line in, but there's nothing on there, so obviously there's nothing playing. Ooh, pull that out. She said the Bluetooth device is ready to pair. I press the mode button on the remote. She says music, and we're back to the USB drive. Next time we'll be taking a look at this, the Mind 65 Bluetooth radio, which uses this very amplifier that we discussed in today's episode. Hey, thanks for watching, and remember, why not do it yourself? You never know what you can do until you try. See you next time.